Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Downtown Download, a COVID Resources and Recovery webinar. This is put on by the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore with Councilman Costello and friends, and today we have some amazing friends joining us today, so thank you for coming. I am one of the co-hosts, Shalonda Stokes, serving as the interim president of Downtown Partnership. I also have the pleasure as serving as the co-chair of the Mayor's Task Force on COVID-19 Small Business Recovery. So a couple things I want to talk about in the form of what we'll go over today, the agenda, high level, just to make sure and tell you a little bit about who you'll be hearing from today. I'll give you a very brief update on what's happening at Downtown Partnership. I'll introduce Councilman Costello, who will then bring on Senator Van Hollen. We'll come back and talk a little bit about what's happening with the task force, and we want to make sure that we open it up for questions for everybody. So please, all throughout, there's a question button at the bottom. Please enter your questions. We'll get to as many of those that we can today as possible. So please enter your questions, and all throughout, we'll continue to answer them. Just to start off and give you a little bit about what's been happening in downtown Baltimore, our teams are back on the streets. We've even added the weekends now as traffic starts to pick up with people downtown, but we do ask for your patience as we go through this. There's a lot of area to cover, and like most organizations, we're also managing, ensuring that our teams are safe in the process. Councilman Costello, before I bring you on, I also want to thank you for your efforts in really engaging city services again and making sure. I know, like many of us with our hair and everything, just trying to get the grass cut and all of these things and getting back to as much as a normal process as we can. We want to do that, and thank you for your leadership there. From a downtown partnership perspective, we're bringing you webinars like this. We have meet and greets, we have happy hours, and we're also doing some information where we want to make sure we're collecting and hearing from you what you want to hear. So if you can, please continue to let us know. We've shifted the format from this a little bit, even from your feedback the last time. So continue to do that, because we want to make sure that we're giving you what's valuable to you. Councilman Costello, I want to make sure that I bring you up. You have done an amazing job in representing the Baltimore City Council 11th District among everything else that you've done. And I'm honored to serve with you as the co-chair of Mayor Young's Small Business COVID-19 Recovery Task Force. And I thank you for bringing Senator Van Hollen today. With all of the friends that you've done, I think this is an amazing win for us in the sense that since he's been able to join the Senate in 2016, what I know and what people know is his personableness, he's always there. And I know that when they talk about him being elected by the people, we know that he's for the people. And so I welcome what he has for us today as well. So Councilman, if you want to take it over from here, I yield the mic to you.
Thank you, Shalonda. And thank you for the kind words. I certainly couldn't represent downtown effectively without the strong working relationship that I have with the Downtown Partnership, with you and your senior team, and all of your staff at Downtown Partnership. So you all are doing great work, and I'm just honored to be a part of the board and a part of that partnership. I'm going to touch on two quick things before we jump to our special guest, Senator Van Hollen. Both are time sensitive. The first has to do with voting. As we all know, the primary election was moved from April 28th to June 2nd. This past week, ballots were started to be mailed out by the Board of Elections. So if you have not received your ballot yet, you should be receiving that. In the chat window in a few seconds, I'm going to post a few links for our audience in case they need more information. The first thing I want to point out is that when you receive your ballot, it's going to say April 28th on it for the date of the primary. That's not correct. It's June 2nd. Part of the reason for that is there was, and I don't think it's anyone's specific fault, there was a lot of back and forth. So you had the executive order from the governor declaring the state of emergency back on March 5th. A short time after that, the governor instructed the State Board of Elections to come up with an alternate plan so that we didn't have to vote in person in the interest of public health. The Board of Elections then got to work They came up with a pretty comprehensive plan. That plan had to be sent back to the governor for his approval. The governor approved the State Board of Elections plan as they drafted it. And then the State Board of Elections had to actually implement the plan, do the work to make sure that we're all able to vote. So the first thing is please ignore the date on there. The second thing is that your ballot will come with an envelope that has prepaid postage on it. So you do not need to include a stamp. I'd like to repeat, you do not need to include a stamp. I'm going to post the instructions here momentarily. I want to remind people that there is going to be an oath on the back of your ballot. You must sign this oath, otherwise your vote will not be counted. It's critically important that you do that. Shalonda, can you ask the moderator to give me chat privileges with the entire group, please? Or Lauren?
Yes, we'll do that. Yep, we'll make sure you get that. And the other thing, Councilman, we at the end are coming back also with some voting information as well. So we'll get that again. Yeah.
Excellent. So be sure that you make sure that be sure that that oath is filled out and signed. And lastly, ballots need to be postmarked by June 2nd, no later than June 2nd. There are going to be up to 4 in-person voting locations per municipality. That's going to be for individuals that are unable to complete their ballot by mail for whatever reason that is. I'm also going to post the link for that for both Baltimore City as well as all the other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland for some of our audience who are not Baltimore City residents. And we're going to continue to remind folks on a weekly basis up through June 2nd, just some basic information about the election. We want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to vote and has their voice heard. The second thing, Shalonda, as you alluded to before, it's just been a pleasure to work with you as co-chair of Mayor Jack Young's COVID-19 Small Business Task Force. The mayor is hosting a telephone town hall tonight, which you and I are going to be participating in. We're also going to have our health commissioner, Letitia DeRaza. Dr. DeRaza has been doing just incredible work throughout this pandemic. We'll have Colin Tarbert, who's the president and CEO of Baltimore Development Corporation, who I know much of our audience is familiar with, as well as Paul Taylor, who's the director of the Mayor's Office of Minority and Women-Owned Businesses. That town hall is going to be at 6:30 p.m. tonight. It's over the telephone with a hard stop at 7:30 p.m. And I will be sure to post information on that in the coming moments. With that, I want to turn it over to our special guest, Senator Chris Van Hollen. Chris, as you like to be referred to, just to speak to how personable you are. We really appreciate you taking time to be on the webinar today to share your perspective. Before we get started, I know there's been a lot of action in Congress recently. You all have been extremely busy, you and Senator Cardin and the rest of our delegation from Maryland, really doing some great work. We've had 4 phases so far of COVID-19 relief. The Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act, about $8.3 billion to help get resources to our healthcare professionals and to support non-businesses or small businesses and nonprofits. Phase 2, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, I believe about $104 billion. Coronavirus testing, expanded sick leave, unemployment insurance, and Medicaid to our states. Then we get to phase 3, the CARES Act, which is probably the single largest piece of stimulus legislation in the history of the country, more than doubling the Recovery Act during the Great Recession. $2 trillion, and that's when we get into the PPP, SBA debt relief, and other programs to provide support not only to small businesses, but to employees. We have phase 3.5, again, dealing with PPP, EIDL. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, $480 billion. So you all have been pretty busy. I was wondering if you can start off just talking about your perspective on where things are at and where you see things going.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you for your leadership and bringing us all together. And it's been good to be in regular communication with you and the mayor and others on the city council, and really grateful for your leadership and bringing us together today, and to Shalonda Stokes and the Downtown Partnership. Thank you for all that you and your team have been doing. What you do in normal times, but what we're all doing now to try to weather the storm so that we can come out on the other side and rebound. So I want to salute you and others who are working hard to try to help people in this time of great need. As the councilman said, we have passed 4 pieces of legislation in the United States Congress for a body that has been pretty slow to move on a lot of important issues. This has been good news. They passed on a bipartisan basis. None of them perfect, but all of them really necessary in order to address the crisis before us. And we really focused on 2 main issues. One is the healthcare battle, the fight to defeat the coronavirus, to treat people who have COVID-19. As the councilman said, we've surged resources to the front lines, the nurses, the doctors, hospitals, importantly, community health centers, nursing facilities, senior living facilities. That's all been a very important part of it. The area where we've been lacking in terms of the healthcare response is not from a shortage of dollars, but a shortage of supplies, personal protective equipment. We all know that we've seen shortages in the state and around the country, the masks, the gowns. I want to salute all the local businesses and others who have jumped in to try to address that shortage, but we really need to do that nationally, and very importantly, testing. As we work to get back to some sense of normalcy, we need to have much more comprehensive and rapid testing to do that in a safe manner. The reason is clear. When we get to the downside of the slope, we don't want this virus to reignite. That means we have to detect it early and isolate people who have it so that it doesn't get out of control and spread. And to do that, you need to be able to test not just people with symptoms, but people who are asymptomatic, because we know one of the things about this disease is so many people can carry it without exhibiting the symptoms themselves. So that is really important. I've been pushing the president to use the DPA, the Defense Production Act, much more fully so that we as a nation can produce the testing that's required. After all, during World War II, we were turning out bombers, you know, a couple a day. For goodness sakes, we can get more swabs and test kits out. So that's an important part. Finally, on the economic piece, to address the economic pain, and I'm happy to go into more details. There are really 4 main elements, and I'm just going to check them off right now. One is the unemployment insurance piece, which is really important, the additional $600 a week, additional eligibility. Now in Maryland, we've had a very difficult time with the State Department of Labor standing up the computer system to process those. We understand that frustration. We've provided them with additional resources, but that is available, and the additional $600 does get backdated to the time of eligibility. I think people are familiar with the individual payments for people within the income eligibility bands. PPP program has done a lot of good, but also has lots of problems. And I was on the floor of the Senate weeks ago when Mitch McConnell wanted to just put more money in the fund. I was saying not so fast, and Senator Cardin and I proposed an alternative to focus more money on community-based lenders, CDFIs, minority depository institutions. There are still big issues, in my view, with this program. The SBA Inspector General just yesterday came out with the report, making an argument that I've already made personally to Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, which is when they impose that 25% cap on fixed costs, they were imposing a requirement that was not in the underlying bill, and that has disadvantaged a lot of small businesses, so we're trying to work on that. Eric mentioned the emergency loan program. That's another important program. Again, happy to get into details. And let me just close with the assistance to state and local governments. So Baltimore City, for example, has received $103 million because they have over 500,000 people. They were able to apply directly to the Department of Treasury. That's the good news. and that money's badly needed. The bad news is that it's not nearly as flexible as it should be. So Councilman Costello and his colleagues can use those funds to pay for costs that are resulting from the coronavirus. In other words, unanticipated costs, but they're not allowed to use those funds to backfill the revenue losses that have been caused by the pandemic. And so we hope in the next round to not only provide additional funds to help folks on the front lines, but to make the use of those funds more flexible. The next round, I hope, will also expand our food assistance, although we've already done that, but we need to do more. There's talk about trying to make sure that we provide hazard pay for people on the front lines. We need to make sure the United States Post Office remains healthy, especially as we go into elections where there's greater reliance on vote by mail. And we need to shore up some of these other programs that I mentioned. So let me close there. Thank all of you for what you're doing in our community with the Downtown Partnership. And I'm happy to try and answer any questions.
Thanks, Senator. We appreciate that. And I'm sure we could probably talk for 24 hours straight with the amount of information that's out there swirling around. This is something that Shalonda and I talk about frequently. It's trying to direct people to reliable sources of information. And your website, Senator, is probably one of the most reliable sources out there and has a wealth of information. To all of our attendees, I'm going to post a few links from Senator Van Hollen's website, and I would encourage you to check those out. I posted a few FAQs or fact sheets on the 4 phases so far of funding that have been passed by the Congress, which Senator Van Hollen just discussed. Please check those out. It helps cut through and get directly to the facts. So I think everyone will find that interesting. Senator, one of the things that you talked about is PPP, the Payment Protection Program, as well as EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loans. We know that those programs have been desperately needed. One of the challenges with the first round of PPP was that those funds dried up pretty quickly because of how in demand they are. I can tell you, I had a conversation with a business leader in the community, I think last Friday, and she interrupted me in the middle of the conversation and said, "Oh my God, Eric, I have to stop you right now. I literally just got an email from my rep at Bank of America. My PPP just came in after a month and a half. This is incredible." Yeah, I shouted out, "That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that." But we know there's a lot of folks out there who have been desperately waiting for those funds to come in. Can you talk a little bit more about those 2 programs, where things are at with them and where you see those going, and if they'll be included in additional legislation down the road?
Yes, as you mentioned, on both programs, we had the initial round of funding and then the second round of funding. So when it comes to the PPP program, when we replenished the fund, we also made some important changes to direct a lot more of the funds through community-based lenders. So $60 billion of the new funds are directed through those more grassroots-based lenders, including, as I mentioned earlier, CDFIs and minority depository institutions. And the goal there is to get more money out into the community. As of today, and I do want to, invite people to visit our website, but also if you have questions, you can email us at assistance@vanhollen.senate.gov. We're working on lots of the PPP applications. Again, what we can do is just try to help people monitor it. It's been a very frustrating process. With PPP, some of the big banks now are not taking additional applications. They want to process the ones that are already in line. Our experience has been that community banks have been much more responsive, that it's easier to get through. They're also online lenders, some of the fintechs that have been engaged in this and processing them. So it's important that if it's not working for you through one particular bank, try some alternatives. We tried to open up the number of entities that can participate in lending here. The other thing with respect to PPP, we're getting a lot of questions about clarifying these terms. And I've written to the Small Business Administration urging them to put out frequently asked questions, answers to this issue, because this is obviously going to be more and more of an issue for people once they get the funds. There have been some people who received the PPP loans, but now are nervous about actually spending them because they want to make sure they comply with the terms for forgiveness, because they don't want at the end of this process to be stuck with a loan that they can't repay. They want to make sure that they can get at least a portion of the forgiveness. And so we're pushing the SBA very hard to clarify some of those terms. On the emergency disaster loans, as of today, the Small Business Administration, the best information I got this morning, is not taking new applications. That does not mean they have run out of money. We're pushing them to reopen the applications, but they've gotten so many, they're not sure when they're going to hit the cap. And so for that reason, also just for bureaucracy reasons or bandwidth reasons, they're not currently processing them, but we're pushing them to expedite that process to move forward. Again, I'm happy to answer any specific questions. I think these are both really important programs, neither of them perfect. The last thing I will say with PPP, one of the major changes I've been trying to get really since the beginning, and we should have made this change at least in the last round, was to better align the 60-day period after someone gets the loan with when that business can expect to reopen. Because there are going to be lots of businesses like restaurants who, even after the end of the 60-day period, don't have customers coming in the door. And so that means that they'll have to, potentially lay off people who they kept on because of the PPE. We need to better align this. The last thing I want to mention, I know it's a long answer, but I do want to mention the work share program in Maryland, because we're one of about 25 states that has a work share program, which means that an employer who has to lay off people because revenues aren't coming in, let's say you have 10 employees, instead of laying off 5, you can keep all 10 employees, but put them on 50% time. And those employees are eligible through the unemployment insurance program to be compensated for the other lost time. And during this emergency period, they're also eligible for the additional $600 per week. So I did want to mention that.
If I could, Councilman and Senator, there's a follow-on question that sort of goes with what you're talking about already. And it's coming from a small business owner who said that she did apply and has been waiting for a response. So it's really a request around, what she could do, should do right now as she sort of waits to hear anything, because she hasn't heard anything at all.
Well, if you can get us the information, we're happy to try to track the status of that request through whatever lender. I know members of my team, my staff, are on this call. So if you're able to get the contact information for that person, we can help track it. Again, we can't guarantee success, but we can try to at least figure out what the status of a particular application is.
Thank you. I'll forward that. And I know she has another note that your office has been amazing. So I believe she's been in contact to some extent, but we'll make sure we pass that on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You want to continue?
Thank you, Shalonda. And just to second what that small business owner said about your office, you all have been incredibly responsive. And not to create more constituent casework for you, Senator, I would strongly encourage all of our attendees to not hesitate to reach out to the Senator's office. You will get a response. I included in the chat window that email address that the Senator provided. That's assistance@vanhollen.senate.gov. Senator, one of the things that I really appreciate about you is that you also happen to be a budget wonk. Really enjoy getting down in the weeds of the budget. What many of our audience may not know, that when you were in the House of Representatives, you were the ranking member on the Budget Committee. And I really appreciate your comments about the $103 million that Baltimore City has received. As you mentioned, there are a number of restrictions around how that money can be used. Right now, the city is focusing on using that for reimbursement through the CARES Act for purposes like assisting individuals that are experiencing homelessness. As many of you may have heard, we are housing a number of individuals experiencing homelessness at the Lord Baltimore Hotel, as well as some other motels in the city and the region. Our small business recovery program, which we've talked about at length, food security efforts. But that money, as I'm sure you can imagine, Senator, is adding up very quickly. And Baltimore City is not unique to this problem. Every other municipality is experiencing this. And we've had to make some very difficult budgetary decisions, just like other municipalities and states. Can you talk a little bit more about what other local assistance we'll be receiving, both at the city and the state level from the federal government, hopefully in subsequent stimulus packages?
Sure, and thank you for what you and the council are doing, and the mayor with the funds that are available to help people really in need. And I will mention, and you know this, we did also provide funds through other programs like the CDBG program, Community Development Block Grant Program. Baltimore City will receive $13 million through that program. Emergency Homeless Program, $13 million. Baltimore City Schools will be receiving money as well. Like the number is $48 million for Baltimore City Schools. And I've been in touch, as I know you have, with the CEO of Baltimore City Schools, urging that those monies be used, at least in part, to deal with the digital divide and make sure that we deal with the homework gap. This is something that I was really focused on even before this pandemic, but the pandemic has revealed all sorts of disparities within our society that we need to be addressing on a much more urgent basis on the healthcare front and on education. So I did want to mention some of those other sources of funding, but as you said, the monies from the federal government cannot be used to backfill, the current monies cannot be used to backfill your ongoing expenses. To provide services. They can only be used to help pay for extraordinary services that were not anticipated until the coronavirus. But you still have your ongoing budget responsibilities, and yet your revenues in the city, of course, are dropping as they are for counties and states because businesses, of course, are hurting and they don't have revenue coming in the door. So we need to address this, just as we're working hard to help small businesses and nonprofits and others. We need to make sure that the local governments on the front lines have the resources you need and in flexible ways. So this has been some matter of controversy. I think many on this discussion may have heard that Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, several weeks ago when we pushed for more money for state and local governments and cities, said, let them all go bankrupt. That was his original response, let them go bankrupt. Now, there's been a lot of pushback to that, including from some members of his party, so he's had to walk that back a little bit. But he is still saying, well, if we're going to provide money to Baltimore City and the state of Maryland and others around the country to help with essential services, well, you've got to do all these other things that actually are really not directly related to the challenge at hand. So my prediction is that we will in the end get more money for state and local governments. This is going to be a longer process than the first 4 rounds, but the House of Representatives will be moving a bill probably Friday of this week. Speaker Pelosi has said that she expects to bring a bill to the floor of the House by Friday or early the following week. Which will provide, according to estimates, again, I haven't seen anything officially, about $1 trillion in relief to state and local governments and channeled so that it can come directly to a lot of jurisdictions, as this first round was coming directly to Baltimore City, right? It helps the city that it doesn't have to go through the state of Maryland to access those funds. And we want to make sure other counties in the state that had fewer than 500,000 people, cities and counties fewer than 500,000 people, are able to access those funds more directly. So stay tuned. This is a big part of what the discussion debate will be all about in the coming weeks, but we got to get it done.
Which is great. Thank you, Senator. Really quick question, if I could interject, because I just want to build on. And this one you talked a little bit about, but for some people, they still are not receiving their unemployment. And so just asking the question about when it's going to start to flow out to the individuals.
Talking about the unemployment or the individual payments? You're talking about unemployment?
Yes, unemployment.
So this has been a source of incredible frustration. I know to thousands of people in our state. The monies for the unemployment insurance run through the state departments of labor, through the state unemployment insurance systems. In Maryland, the computer system about 10 days ago crashed when they tried to launch it with the newly eligible, the vendor that they contracted with couldn't deal with the volume. So we're continuing to push them to try to make more people available on the phones, and so that they can at least answer questions or be more responsive. The federal government has provided 2 rounds of funding to the state of Maryland to total $16 million to help them hire navigators and others who can help people who are applying for UI. But this is an area where we're getting a lot of constituent requests, and we're doing our best to help people understand the situation as we push the state hard on this. I know the legislature, there's going to be a committee hearing in the legislature about the challenges right now navigating the Maryland unemployment insurance system. I can say that other states have gotten up and running more quickly. We need to make sure that Maryland does as well.
Thank you so much. Councilman?
Senator, I had one last question. We've heard a lot of talk about subsequent relief packages, including funding for infrastructure, specifically for water and broadband. In the city of Baltimore, as you're aware, we're under an EPA consent decree. I think our total price tag on that's going to be about $2.6 billion when everything is said and done. We're about $1.6 billion into that. And broadband is of particular interest, as you pointed out, with respect to the digital divide, ensuring that our families across the city, especially those who have kids, are connected to the internet, whether it's for education purposes, whether it's for work, job opportunities, et cetera. Municipal broadband is something that the city's been looking at for some time. Do you have any insight into what we can expect in subsequent relief packages, and if there will be an infrastructure piece, what that may look like?
Well, thanks for raising that question. I think we really need a national infrastructure modernization plan, and it needs to be broad-based. It needs to include the things people often traditionally think of as infrastructure: the roads, the bridges, transit ways. But it also does need to include water and sewer, which of course are the infrastructure that we don't see as much. And it also needs to include, in my view, modernizing our electric grid and making it cleaner. And it very much needs to include high-speed internet. So this is an area where, again, Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, said he did not want to include infrastructure in this package. And Speaker Pelosi, I'm not sure whether or not they're going to include infrastructure in this round. I wish they would, because I think we need the investment. And I also think it's really important as we try to turn the corner on this pandemic and as we try to safely reopen. Construction jobs, outdoor construction jobs, are the kind of thing that can be done safely in many cases, as long as people observe all the protocols. And at the same time, will help put people back to work. I mean, we've got, as you know, over 25 million across the country, or close to 25 million now, unemployed. And thousands of Marylanders. So I think we need a very large infrastructure modernization plan. That is not, according to all reports, going to be part of the House plan, and partly because Leader McConnell said he wouldn't do it. But I am continuing to push, even in this round, for the larger package, and certainly for the piece that you just referenced, which is building out high-speed internet. I tried to get a dedicated $2 billion fund in the last round to help with the digital divide, and we're going to make another run at that. As I said, the good news is the monies that have come to the state and to each jurisdiction, including Baltimore City, can be used for that purpose. And I know some of them are, but we really need a dedicated national program. And there are really three pieces to this digital divide homework gap. One is some people don't have computers in their households, and we need to address that. Second, there are those who don't have the connection, the infrastructure connection. In rural areas, sometimes that's actually the hardware. In other areas like Baltimore City, sometimes you need a hotspot device to download or other infrastructure connections. And third, sometimes it's the cost of a data plan. We need to address all three because students cannot be put at this disadvantage. We used to call this the homework gap because 70% of the assignments that teachers give require access to the internet. But now that we're talking about not just homework, but really an effort to provide, much more online learning, it's even more important. And the kids and students who don't have access to that just fall behind their peers. And so it's an inequity that needs to be addressed immediately. And it's one of those areas where we need to address it in urban areas, in suburban areas, and in rural areas. And so we're going to push really hard for that as part of the next package.
Thank you. Shalonda, I'm going to turn it back to you for some questions from our audience.
Yep, and we have quite a few. I'll start with the one, Senator, that you could probably specifically address, and then Councilman, we have some for you as well. I'll start off, this is actually city and state, but what is, as we've really looked to reopening, I think businesses and individuals are nervous about going back. And so the question is, what is the city and state doing to address the potential Senate legislation that will provide immunity for businesses and people with lawsuits from their employees if the employee contracts COVID-19?
So I let the council member Costello speak to the city issue. The state and national level, there are discussions with respect to liability protection. It's always important to strike the balance because you don't want people who have legitimate claims where there has been gross negligence. You don't want to shield the people who put them in danger unnecessarily and in a negligent way. You don't want to shield them from liability. So this is why it's important to strike the balance. Obviously, when people go back to work and when we reopen, in order to maintain the confidence of the public, it's going to be really important that everybody observe the protocols, the social distancing protocols. This is not going to be like flipping on a switch, right? It's more like going from off to a little dimmer, a little brighter, because we need to monitor the situation, which is why the testing component is so very important, that we can detect those outbreaks. But with respect to the liability question, is going to be debated. And again, obviously we don't want to see frivolous lawsuits, but at the same time, we don't want to deny rights and protections to people who have been ordered to be put into unnecessarily dangerous situations.
No, thank you.
I think the city has taken a very similar approach, attempting to be both balanced and measured throughout that process. So agree with everything the senator said.
Right, which I know, for us internally, I think part of what both of you are talking about is very sensitive on all sides. And unfortunately, how COVID-19, how you even contracted, it's hard to tell. And so there are so many nuances to it, not a one answer thing. But sort of looking out, one more question, and Senator, I know we could probably just get in one and leave you some time to do some closing remarks too. The team, you'll have Councilman Costello and I for the rest of this time as well. But Senator, looking further out, people are starting to think about, similar to what you talked about, it won't be that we flip a switch and we're back to normal. So when you think about 6 months from now, even, what are some of the economic and social impacts that you think we can expect, and where we can really look to get some state and federal support?
Well, this is the big question we all have. And, I rely I know the Baltimore City leadership does, and the state, on the medical experts for exactly the best way to safely reopen. And, I think we understand that a vaccine is still some time off. Dr. Fauci, I think is expected to testify today on Capitol Hill, has said that it's 12 to 18 months before a vaccine could be available. Assuming we get one, I think people are upbeat, that are positive about that, but obviously there's a long time between now and then. And the key is to make sure that we conduct ourselves in a way that doesn't allow the virus to get fired up again in a big way. When we get on the downside of the slope, we want to stay there because the virus is not going to just go away. And so we need to make sure that we organize ourselves in a way to really minimize the spread of the virus. And so we're going to have to be very creative about doing it. And in the meantime, we look at the federal level, we need to continue to provide help as people continue to weather the storm. Hopefully the storm will go from, this Category 4 hurricane into something of more mild form of the storm, but the help will still be required. And our challenge is to calibrate all that.
Totally agree. And I think this is definitely one of those things where we have to all be in this together. We have some other questions and comments of people who are just recognizing that for some, I don't know if they don't understand the seriousness, believe it or not, but people still aren't fully engaged in wearing masks and with the social distancing piece. So this is something that we're all going to have to sort of pursue together. Councilman, did you have one more question or not before we allow the senator to give some final words on this part? Think you may be muted if you're talking.
I have a quick one, Senator. Can you briefly discuss what your position is on the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rental Market Stabilization Act that's being introduced in both the Senate and
Yes, thanks for raising that. I'm a co-sponsor. I'm supporting the Emergency Rental Assistance Act along with Senator Sherrod Brown, a number of us on the Banking Committee, which has also jurisdiction over housing, have been pushing that because what we know is that at the end of this period of forbearance, where we've all been pushing landlords to not collect rent and not engage in evictions, which obviously is a good thing. At the end of this period, a lot of people may have these balloon payments due in terms of the back payments on rent. And so we need to address that issue in terms of emergency rental assistance, and that we're pushing to include that in this next round of legislation. That's a really important part. I will say that the unemployment insurance piece with the additional $600 a week is also intended to help people pay these bills. Now, I know there's a cash flow problem for those who have not been able to process those claims yet. But as I said earlier, once you get through the process, you will receive that additional $600 a week backdated. And so that also is intended to help people, that additional $600 a week to help people pay the bills. But there will still be people who, despite that, either could not access that for some reason, despite that, we'll have additional rental payments that may be unaffordable. So yes, we're working to include that as part of the next package, and I'm a sponsor of that bill.
Thank you, Senator. Now we'll turn it over to you for any closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you for your leadership on the City Council and working with your colleagues and the mayor, to Shalonda and your whole team at the Downtown Partnership. Thank you for what you're doing, and really, we just need to all keep working together. We've seen that when we take care of our neighbors, we can help people better weather the storm. There's a lot of economic pain out there. There are a lot of people who are also suffering from the health impacts. So it's our job and our duty really to work to address all those needs. And I have the same questions a lot of people ask, exactly how we are going to, we got to get back to some sense of normalcy, but we have to do it in a careful way. Otherwise, we're just going to be right back where we started, and that would be bad for people's health as well as very bad for the economy. So let's reopen in a smart way and continue to provide the help that's necessary and ramp up this testing at the federal level so that we can do that more rapidly. So thank all of you very much at the Downtown Partnership. Thank your board, thank the entire team. It's good to be with you, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you so much. I know you asked early on, so thank you on behalf of our entire team and our interim board chair, Mark Wasserman, who is listening on the line as well. I know you asked about him earlier, and so I thank him for the connection and his leadership on this as well.
Well, let me thank him as well. We worked together back in the day for Governor William Donald Schaefer. It's good to have Mark on board, on the board of the Downtown Partnership. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Senator, thank you so much. We are incredibly lucky to have you representing Baltimore and the state of Maryland in the United States Senate, and especially downtown. You've done just incredible work over the past few months, and we are very appreciative. So thank you for taking your time today and joining.
Thank you. Take care.
So for everyone else, thank you. Please stay tuned. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into what we're doing from a city level. Councilman Costello, I know we have a few questions about what the city is doing, but thought before we go deep into the questions, we could also spend some time just talking about the task force, because that may answer some of them. I know you did a high level in the beginning, but if we could sort of break that down a little bit, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. Do you want to kick things off, or?
Yep, I don't mind doing that at all. We actually have in a couple of things. So you stole some of the thunder early on in there, because we were talking about, you started going through all of them. But part of what's been really exciting about this process is the togetherness, I think, and the oneness that we've all come to know that we have to do in order to get through this thing together. Under Mayor Young's leadership, he created the COVID-19 Small Business Task Force. And I'm honored that he asked you and I to co-chair that. And it's not just us, it is a team of amazing business leaders, large and small, nonprofit, the health department. And so the thought behind it is that you pull together a number of people who have tentacles into other areas as well. So it's not like this one body is making all of the decisions, in the sense that we're doing it without pulling in resources. And so I'm excited about that. And as we look at this task force, and I know you can break down the elements, but just at a very high level, what this task force is doing right now is looking at how do we help with the disbursement of the resources that we have already. And then as we sort of look to reopening, how do we as a unit do that responsibly? And so whether it is figuring out how we help small businesses adjust, or for even some of the questions that came in earlier, how we help, you know, our neighbors, our members, and everybody with that, that's the focus of the task force. So Councilman, if you want to break down the components, I think that's within that and where we are, that would be helpful.
Sure. Thanks for that, Shalonda. So the package is split into 5 pieces. The first is the task force that we've talked about. We hope that our attendees will join us. Those meetings are open to the public. So our next meeting is going to be this Thursday at 11 a.m. We're meeting every other Thursday. The second and third piece has to do with procurement of PPE from local makers and manufacturers. $400,000 has been appropriated to BDC. They are working very closely through me with the Emergency Operations Center on procuring PPE for city needs from local makers and manufacturers. I'm pleased to report that we got our first order done mid last week, and we selected 2 maker manufacturers that are local firms in Baltimore City that are both minority owned that have already been doing great work in the community. So it seemed to make a lot of sense. So that program's moving along. We had a call yesterday just to get an update on things, and you know, we're all very pleased with the progress that we're making there. On the third piece, which is the $100,000 in grants to makers and manufacturers to help them transition their business model. Those applications closed yesterday. There's been an incredible demand there. We're really excited about the number of applications that have come in. And I know that BDC, as well as Made in Baltimore is a subsidiary program, if you will, BDC is working to get through those applications. Then there's the $3.5 million package, which is for up to $15,000 grants to businesses. Those applications close on Friday, May 15th at 11:59 p.m. That's this Friday. I would encourage everyone to go to baltimoretogether.com. That's baltimoretogether.com. I'll type that URL in the chat in a moment to get more information on how to apply. We're trying to ensure that we have a focus on businesses that may not have received previous relief through the federal or state government, and trying to make sure that we are making that as widely available as humanly possible. And then the last piece deals with $1.5 million. That's work that BDC is doing in conjunction with the Neighborhood Design Center for certain retail commercial districts throughout the city. I think things are moving along. We've already started to connect community leaders and business leaders in those neighborhoods with the Neighborhood Design Center. They're going to be focusing on how to create more opportunities for outdoor seating, how to create parklets through the removal of a few parking spaces here or there, how to create more signage, whether that's wayfinding or informational on social distancing, or to wear a mask, or wear gloves, etc. So that's moving along. That last piece is going to take a little longer than the rest, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And lastly, we're working on some additional things on the back end, and I'm hopeful that the mayor's going to be in a position to make some announcements in the near future about additional support mechanisms for our small business community.
So thank you, Councilman. And some of this I know in the Q&A you started to answer, but want to make sure for those on the line we're able to also get this, and it's a tie-in. So, you know, there are really questions around the city's position and whether or not the city has an official plan for reopening.
Sure, that's a great question. Shalonda, I can't recall a day that's gone by in the last 3 weeks where you and I haven't been on the phone or a webinar talking about that together. We've put a lot of thought into that. We know that the folks at BC, Colin Tarbert and his team are thinking about that. And I think we're making a lot of progress. You know, at the task force meeting on Thursday, we have a member of the health department who's a member of that. We're going to be talking about how to put together some guidance for small businesses as they prepare to reopen. One of the things we've talked about in the past is the governor's reopening plan. As Senator Van Hollen pointed out, and something that you've heard Shalonda and I talk about frequently, there's no switch to turn everything back on. Again, hopefully when we're in person at the State of Downtown breakfast next year, I don't think any of us are going to agree on when was the one exact moment when things reopened. we're all going to have a different perspective. And that's going to require patience on all our parts to get through this, to take a measured and balanced approach toward reopening, recognizing that there's a public health pandemic, but on the other end, we need to get businesses open so that people are getting their paychecks and businesses are succeeding in our city. So we're very focused on that. At the end of the day, it is incumbent upon the state to handle the reopening. We're going to follow the state's lead. We're going to work very closely with them. But what we thought as co-chairs of the task force, Shalonda, we've talked about, is that it's really important that we start to take the lead in terms of thinking through what are some of those guidelines around reopening, and how do we better position our businesses in Baltimore City to be prepared to go once the governor starts lifting the stay-at-home order and other executive orders.
No, absolutely. Thank you. As we shift to the next slide, because I know we have a couple questions, I want to remind everyone that we'll get to as many of them today we did as possible, but we'll also make sure that we're following up, because we realize the value in something like this is being able to respond to you directly. So we'll make sure we do that as well. As we transition to talk about voting, I do want to say there was a question around dealing with homelessness. This is very important to us, even a Downtown Partnership. And the city has made some strides. I mean, I don't know, having one homeless person, that's a problem enough. And so it's not illegal for homeless people to be on the corners. We do recognize that there's some mental illness around that. And so some of them have been, which is great, placed in hotels, which the city is doing. We're working with them, and we have a large emphasis on homeless outreach and have had recently some major wins around the chronically homeless and us really being able to help move them. It is a process. It's important. It's a part of our focus. And so I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we remain steadfast in that.
Well, Nate Fields and his team under your leadership, Shalonda, have just been doing great work. But I think, as you pointed out, it's a process. It takes time. It takes patience, especially when we're dealing with individuals with mental health and substance abuse issues, many times who don't want help or are afraid to get help or suspicious of help. So we'll continue to chip away at it and work together on that.
Which is key. I know you mentioned the voting piece. You put some links in the chat. June 2nd is definitely the date on that. Please, 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 everybody, your vote counts. It's voting by mail. For that, please do your part in here. Anything, Councilman, you want to add to the voting piece?
Just please remember to fill out that oath on the back. It is, we live in a democracy. It's critically important that everyone's voice is heard. I know I am anticipating the moment that I get my ballot, as many of you are. So please just take your time, make sure you fill it out correctly. Make sure you do everything you're supposed to so that your vote is heard. Okay, so moving next, and we just have a couple more things. Councilman, you talked about the Baltimore City Telephone Town Hall this evening. And this is really great in the sense that for people who don't have computer access or anything like that, the mayor wanted to make sure that it was open for everyone. So you can see on the screen who's taking part. The councilman talked about it, led by Mayor Young. We have Dr. Letitia Duraza from the Health Department leading that, Councilman Costello. I'm participating, Colin Tarbert from BDC, and then you have Paul Taylor from the Mayor's Office of Small Business. So power packed in that way. Please bring your questions. I only want the easy ones though, so don't give me any hard ones, but please join today. The phone number is there. We also put it in the chat, and we'll make sure that everyone gets it on that. And then didn't want to leave without talking about what's next. Councilman, you've been phenomenal in getting us stellar talent. And you continue to deliver. I don't know what you're going to get us even after this, but I know next week, May 19th, we have Delegate Brooke Learman, and we have Senator Antonio Hayes and some other things. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know if you want to tease anything with that or if you want to save all of the secrets. One quick thing. I know there's a lot of uncertainty around what's going on with this pandemic, a lot of information out there. I've gotten a lot of questions about unemployment insurance, as has Senator Van Hollen and his team. So that's a specific state issue. So, you know, I think as we work through the questions for Senator Hayes and Delegate Learman, who are both members of our board at Downtown Partnership, we're going to be thinking through some of the state-specific related issues. And the two of them are very informed, are great public servants, both have a wealth of information, and I think are going to be well positioned to help answer some of those state-related questions. So really looking forward to having the senator and the delegate join us.
Which is good, and thank you. And one of the things that I think is people register, part of what we're encouraging people to do early is to send their questions early. That helps form how you ask, what you ask, and so we're encouraging people to do that. You will get the slides there available on the Go Downtown Baltimore website. And so we want to make sure that people have access to that, along with all of the information that we'll have. So as we sort of tune off, we want to make sure that you know where you can get the information from us, where you can see us, how you can tune in. A list of all of the resources that we have are on our website, the COVID-19 resources. And then you can follow us as you have been, thank you, on social media, Facebook, Twitter, even on our YouTube page. People are really tuning in. So thank you